שלום, שלום לכולם ולכולן. מאוד צר לי לא להיות איתכם היום, וכדי לחגוג את מורתנו אילנה פרדס, שאני אומרת לה שלום במפורט. שלום. אני מאוד מודה למארגנות ומארגנים שאפשרו לי להתחבר דרך הזום, אז תודה רבה לגדעון טיקוצקי, לגורזק ולאופיר כמובן, על כל ההתארגנות. ואני אעבור ברשותכם לאנגלית ולשתף את המסך. הנה, אני מקווה שאתם רואות. Okay. In my presentation today, I wish to honor Ilana's attentive and always inspiring readings of sacred text and their modern transformation, as well as her Melvillian preference for maritime settings. We have spent a wonderful semester last year together exploring different shores and sea stories, and I am deeply grateful to Ilana for all our conversations around this and many other topics, of which this talk is in many respects the result. I will concentrate on a famous passage from the Gospel of Matthew in which the beginning of Christ's preaching is described. In this episode, Jesus approaches the shores of the Sea of Galilee or Lake Tiberias, the Kinneret. Jesus addresses local fishermen going about their fishing activities with the following words: "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." The fishermen leave everything behind and become Jesus' first followers, apostles, and missionaries. Indeed, Simon Peter, better known simply as Peter, will famously become the church's first leader, the stone on which the Christian church is built. For this reason, the Pope, Peter's heir, wears the so-called annulus piscatoris, the fisher's ring. I read this momentous scene on the shores of the Kinneret in the context of my current research on the representation of artisanal fishing communities and the dramatic transformation of the coast in modern Italian culture. I am intrigued by this scene in the Gospel because it marks the passage from the materiality of labor to the metaphysical dimension of allegory. We witness how these men leave their nets, families, and livelihoods behind for a vague promise in need of interpretation. For what exactly does it mean to become fishers of men? To the audience of the time, the apostolic mission entailed in this wording seemed clear, though it takes, for Peter at least, some time to rise to the top. Still, what implication does the sudden and abrupt extraction of these fishermen from the lake's shores and their communities have, both within the narration itself and on a broader scale, both for this story and for history? In what follows, I will discuss a modern interpretation of this episode by the Italian writer and director Pierpaolo Pasolini. As I will show in his 1964 film, The Gospel According to Matthew, Pasolini grapples with this scene and offers a subtle reflection on the violent uprooting implied in Jesus' calling of the apostles at Lake Tiberias. Read against the background of the commodification of the Italian coastline, as well as of the Kinneret, which Pasolini had been documenting in the same years, the scene of the calling in the film becomes a sharp critique of the capitalist, colonial, and extractivist expropriation of artisanal fishing communities. In more general terms, I will advance the hypothesis that this process of expropriation is prepared in the scene of the calling of the apostles, as the fishermen are made to abandon their craft for a spiritual goal that disregards the bodily and the material. In this sense, this scene is pivotal for my engagement with the modern representations of fishing communities as a whole. I would go as far as to say that it hovers over any artistic depiction of artisanal fishery in Western modernity as the implicit lens through which such depictions are produced and perceived. What this means for each artwork, be it a novel, a painting, or a film, and how they emancipate themselves from this legacy needs to be carved out from case by case. In modern Italian literature and visual art in particular, there are plenty of works of these kinds, and here's one example from 1855. They point to an intense negotiation with both mythical narratives and political and socioeconomic transformation affecting the coast from the second half of the 19th century until today. In this respect, Pasolini evidently offers the most explicit example since his film closely follows the Gospel's wording. Before I turn to the film, let me quote a passage from Matthew in its entirety in the King James Version. And Jesus, walking by the Sea of Galilee, saw two brethren, Simon called Peter and Andrew his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishers. And he said unto them, Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. And they straightway left their nets and followed him. And going on from thence, he saw other two brethren, James the son of Zebedee and John his brother, in a ship with Zebedee their father, mending their nets, as he called them. And he called them, and they immediately left the ship and their father and followed him. The evangelical text is extremely concise and concerned with actions rather than reflection. No explanation is provided for the fishermen's decision to abandon everything and follow Jesus. The fishermen are recognizable as such by what they do. The two moments of calling of Peter and Andrew and of James and John, respectively, are almost identical in their wording. The mention of James and John's father draws attention both to their relatively young age and to the imminent disruption of a family unity. How will Zebedee's family survive without the contribution of these two young men? The text's succinctness loads every word with meaning. Early Christian exegesis already dwelled extensively on this passage in an attempt to counter Greco-Roman criticism of the New Testament's low, rough, and simple form, known as stilus piscatorius, the fisher's style. In an article published in 1941 that anticipates the central thesis on Stilmischung, the mixing of high and low styles, in Mimesis, Erich Auerbach discusses the revolutionary specificity of this stilus piscatorius, the fisherman's style. This fisherman's style combines the humble with the sublime, the everyday with the transcendent, marking what Auerbach calls the, I quote, eruption of realist humility into the written text. But why would Jesus have chosen out of all possible humble professions fishermen as his first apostles? The church father Origenes explains, referencing Paul, that the choice of uneducated workers who cannot be won over by subtle rhetoric underscores the power of godly intervention. Modern biblical scholars have explained the choice of fishermen by reading the phrasing fishers of men within the context of ancient mysteric, specifically Dionysian cults across the Mediterranean. Mosaics depicting the casting of nets by a fisher, such as the one found in Milos, would then represent the initiation to the cult of its members, portrayed as fish. Others have pointed to the rabbinical tradition in which students of the Torah are likened to fish. But why then would the evangelical story conflate the allegorical with the literal in such a way? Is addressing actual fishermen to become fishers of men just a pun? Why mention their craft at all? And how can we rethink, to use Ilana's already mentioned formulation in her biography of Song of Songs, the nexus between the literal and the allegorical in this context? Recent readings of the formulation fishers of men have taken the reference literally and have embedded the evangelical passage within the socioeconomic relations that existed at the time of Jesus' teaching. Seen in this context, the choice of fishermen as the first apostles would have been of eminent strategic significance. According to John Kloppenborg, a scholar of early Christianity, various sources demonstrate that the fishing industry on the Sea of Galilee was thriving at the time of Jesus' preaching. Fishermen evidently played a central role in this industry and were not that destitute as previous interpretations alleged. Their presence does not point solely to the fact that Jesus had chosen the poorest and the most marginalized to be his first companions, as stated by the exegetical tradition. In fact, Kloppenborg argues that fishers were very well connected with many other segments of society, which made them an effective vector to spread the message of a new cult. Pasolini also proposes a very literal, concrete reading of the evangelical passage. His interest in the material dimension of the scene produces its expansion with an attention to detail that is absent from the source. Pasolini stretches the few evangelical lines up to 2 minutes, an eternity in filmic terms. Let's watch the scene together.
Andrea. Venite con me, che vi farò pescatori d'uomini. Giacomo, Giovanni, figli di Zebedeo, venite con me.
The scene of the calling of the apostles in Pasolini's film lingers attentively on the fishermen and their activities, with a gaze still reminiscent of neorealist cinema. Artisanal fishing communities, artisanal fishing specifically, had been portrayed in similar ways in Italian neorealist cinema before, for example, by Luchino Visconti in La Terra Trema in 1948 and Roberto Rossellini in Stromboli in 1950. Andrew is taking out a net from the water, while Peter is lowering another in the sea. James and John run on the beach to stretch out their nets that need repairing. The camera lingers on their free, light-hearted movement. This specific action is not mentioned in the Gospel's text. In the initial full shot, landscape and figure are intrinsically connected to one another through concrete gestures and practices. In these shots, the figures are always shown from the side, their gaze oriented towards their action, never towards the camera. Moreover, the human figures are also shown in their interaction with objects, nets and boats, and other humans. They are entangled in a relational net that is torn both visually and de facto when Jesus appears. As audience, we are made to witness a moment of communal life in a specific environment that will soon be disrupted. Suddenly, the future apostles are separated from the landscape, their companions, and the tools of their work. They become individuals when Jesus calls each of them by their name, and their faces appear for the first time frontally in extreme close-up. The zooming in used for Peter and Andrew underscores the abruptness of this change. The other fishermen remain anonymous and disappear from the screen. In the scene's last shot, again a full shot, we see the apostles walking away with Jesus from behind, literally and metaphorically turning their backs on their old life. Why did Pasolini stretch this particular scene so much beyond the scope provided by the text? How are we to understand the details added and the stress on the relationality between landscape and figure? The way in which the fishermen are handling their nets in the scene provides a clue to discuss these questions more accurately. The net that they are using is most likely a shabica, a traditional trawl net for coastal fishing used by Italian fishers and across the Mediterranean. The net's name comes from the Arabic word for net, shabaka, and testifies to the Arab influence in the peninsula. As shown in the film, this kind of net requires men to be both on the shore and on small boats not far from it. It needs to be stretched out entirely to be mended. It implies collective, collaborative labor, often involving the whole community. Indeed, Pasolini filmed this scene, as he did with the Gospel as a whole, in southern Italy, where local fishers would certainly have used this kind of technique. Specifically, we are here on the coast of the southern Italian region of Calabria, close to Crotone. With this in mind, the scene becomes a small tribute to ancient artisanal fishing techniques practiced in this part of the Mediterranean, at a point in time when these practices were being supplanted by industrial fishing with motorized trawlers, and the coast repurposed to serve the tourist industry. Pasolini was aware of this shift of this irreversible transformation and was very critical of it. In 1959, he had traveled all along Italy's coast by car and published his travelogues regularly in newspapers with photographs by Paolo di Paolo. In 1964, the same year of the Gospel, Pasolini also shot Comizi d'amore, love meetings, which also includes numerous scenes set on Italian beaches in summer. These show the coast as a site of leisure, consumerism, and mass entertainment, a phenomenon that had grown under fascist rule and developed exponentially with the economic boom of the afterwar period. The fact that these two films were shot and came out in the same year invites a parallel reading of these starkly different, even opposite representations of the Italian coast. Pasolini insists on the realist dimension of the gospel already highlighted by Auerbach, but also emphasizes that Christ's companions are still to be found among the workers, those who inhabit the coast through their labor rather than as a site of consume and diversion. However, in addition, Pasolini's lingering on the fisherman's gestures also has an elegiac dimension, as the fishermen in a time of crisis follow the calling of a radical and subversive message of social justice, something, a body of knowledge, practices, ways of relating to and being in the world are also irremediably lost. The scene preserves this tension without offering any solution or providing any relief. While the Gospel's protagonist, Pasolini says in an interview, is evidently Christ, the film's antagonist are the poor, the underclass, not only of Italy, but of the global South as a whole. By choosing to set the scene of the calling of the apostles on the coast of Italy, Pasolini also makes a further statement which pertains to the original setting of the Gospel, namely the Sea of Galilee. The production company of the film requested that Pasolini travel to Israel-Palestine in order to see for himself the sites of Jesus' life and consider shooting his film there. The film Location Scouting in Palestine for the Gospel, according to Matthew, documents Pasolini's journey in the summer of 1963. Pasolini, a pilgrim of sorts, did not shoot this film himself and did not plan to make it public. Pasolini edited the location scouting quickly and roughly, and it was shown publicly only once during a film festival in 1965. The trip did not persuade him to shoot his Gospel in Israel-Palestine. On the contrary, the highly industrialized country he found upon landing in Tel Aviv did not correspond to the pre-industrial landscape and figures he was seeking for his film. More importantly, Pasolini did not want to be so literal as to shoot in the Holy Land and opted rather for analogy as the guiding principle of his aesthetic choices. Among the places he visited during his trip to Israel-Palestine were, of course, also Capernaum, Farnahum, and the shores of the Kinneret. Let me show you a brief extract from the film to give you a sense of the operation that Pasolini carries out in parallel to the Gospel.
Ancora sulle rive del lago di Tiberiade, questo piccolo lago che gli ebrei antichi chiamavano mare e che io immaginavo come un immenso mare, appunto. Invece qui puoi constatare la modernità della struttura sociale di Israele e il reale benessere di questa nazione. Questo lo dico perché nel caso che si dovesse girare il film là, immagino che sarebbe molto difficile trovare delle comparse. Tutti lavorano, il loro lavoro ben retribuito e soprattutto un lavoro ideale.
The images accompanied by Pasolini's voice-over comments speak for themselves. Lake Tiberias has become an overcrowded tourist attraction, and nothing of the Gospel's pre-industrial world seems to have survived there. Pasolini's choice of shot and the editing here is, I argue, not accidental. The two men proudly holding up their catch of fish are fishing for leisure. For these men, fishing is a sport and a form of entertainment. Their presence on screen at this point of the location scouting is deeply ironic, since the parallel with the Gospel's artisanal fishers will not have been lost on the audience. Those two men are the modern fishers that have taken the place of those fishers whose livelihood depended on fishing and that Christ wanted as his companions. As in Love Meetings, Pasolini offers at the same time and in parallel two readings of the same space, having one haunt the other. Cut together, these scenes summarize processes of re-territorialization of the coast in capitalist modernity. The crowded beach of Lake Tiberias in the summer of 1963 contrasts sharply with the almost empty Calabrian coastline. The place where the historical preaching of Christ has occurred has become a space of over-tourism and exploitation in a highly modernized colonial state. In contrast, the shore in the gospel is a space of subaltern labor and unmediated freedom. I would like to end by introducing briefly another take on fishing on the Kinneret that illuminates yet another aspect of this story, which Pasolini, for reasons that it would be too long to discuss here, does not address. In 2017, Hazem Harb, a Palestinian artist born in Gaza in 1980 and now based in Dubai, created a series of collages titled Tiberius. The reference to the emperor after whom the city of Tiberias was named exposes the foreign imperial connotation of the lake's name. For his collages, Harb has worked extensively with archival material within the framework of a project called Archaeology of Occupation. In Tiberias, fishermen feature prominently in the various pieces that form part of the series. The old photographs that Harb used as centerpieces of the collage show forms of artisanal fishery that was practiced on Lake Tiberias. We can discern very specific kinds of boats and sails, and the fishers handling their nets, most likely drag nets, as the one shown in Pasolini's Gospel. The photographs likely predate the Nakba. In his collage, Harb introduces breaks and cuts into the photographs, restructures them according to harsh geometries and dizzying superpositions of forms and colors. The archival document peeks through layers of what seems to be an artificially planned geography. Just as the coast, these photographs are and re-territorialized. Where are those Palestinian fishermen located within the logic of expropriation that governs the modern colonial capitalist relation with the coast? I leave this question open for now. Returning to the shore of the Sea of Galilee through readings of the calling of the apostles in the Gospel invites a reflection on mechanisms of exclusion and commodification of the coastline, as artisanal fishing communities are increasingly marginalized to make space for beachfront resorts and the entertainment industry. It requires an exercise in political ecology, which entails also a specific ecology of text and images. This exercise offers new perspectives on current political and ecological crises. Who then and where will Christ's revolutionary message of radical critique of power be directed to? Who will respond to it if no corner of the planet is left untouched by the homogenizing reach of consumerism, extractivism, violence, and exploitation? What these readings show us until today might be that the answer to this question lies in what anthropologist Arturo Escobar has recently called territories of difference, namely a unique place-making and region-making, ecologically, culturally, and socially, where different ontologies, different ways of inhabiting the world are involved. In order to shape another possible world, we need to be reminded of the territories of difference that have been annihilated closest to us. And art, as Ilana has taught us time and again, can and should be an intervention to this end. Thank you very much.